All right.
I'm making it live on YouTube, madam. In 1 minute, it will take.
Okay.
Okay. So, dear participants, we have with us our resource person, Professor Mona Khare Madam. She is presently all know, New Delhi. Madam has been an invited speaker in various international education forums like Commonwealth, UNESCO, SARC, and British Council, etc., and traveled almost all around the world and delivered lecture in various universities and various other forums also, and holds various advisory position in different committees of colleges and universities, and conferred with Young Economist Award by Indian Economic Association, and many more. Madam has many publications to her credit in journals, books, and magazines of national and international repute. Today, we are very lucky to have you, Madam, with us. Thank you so much. Today, the theme of our webinar is G20 Presidency, India and Global Welfare, organized by Department of Economics, Government John Mam College. I think Madam will focus mainly on economic agenda. So as we all know, the G20 India assumes presidency from December 2022. So the previous presidencies since 1999 delivered significant results like economic stability, relieving debt burdens on countries, and many other outcomes. Can G20 go further, and what India can contribute in the world with Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam will be the focus of today's webinar. So I request Madam to deliver her precious piece on it, and Dr. Lal Lankimi will help her to navigate the PPT. She is the Assistant Professor, Department of English from our college, and she will also deliver vote of thanks. So I once again welcome all the participants and our respected Madam, resource person. Madam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sinha. It's again a pleasure to join you all. And I'm so glad that such an important topic for discussion has been chosen by you. I'm very happy to be amongst you all, and I am grateful for you for giving me this opportunity as well. Now, as the topic says, global welfare and the G20 India presidency. What better than talking about education when we are talking about global welfare? So I thought it would be good to focus my talk today, not just on education as a whole, but the kind of demands, the new demands which are being put up on the education in terms of capacity building of our young learners, in terms of how we can make some such arrangements that they are able to upskill themselves. So that is what is known as the lifelong learning systems to be enabled, particularly in the light of the future of work, which is going to change at a very fast pace. So this is how I thought I will be organizing my talk today. If somebody who's navigating the PPT can open the PPT, please.
Sir, you have to enable the screen sharing for the participants. I can't pull it up. Sir, can you hear me? You're muted, sir.
You are the host now, so can you do it?
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, so as I said, that this is what I'm going to talk about in the next 20-25 minutes or so, and then we can have a round of discussion if time permits. Can we move to the next slide, please?
Excuse me, ma'am, let me try that again, okay? I think it's stuck for some reason.
I'll do one thing. Let me try. No, again, it has been disabled. Like participants cannot share the screen. I see. Yeah. So this is how I thought I would be structuring my presentation today. There are 4 G20 education working groups in the Indian presidency. So I'll be talking a little bit about them. What is the current status in terms of the very track on capacity building, lifelong learning, and the future of work? What are its current focus areas and priorities? And then we can have some discussion points and what are the expected outcomes from the G20 presidency at India. May we move to the next slide, please? Professor Sena, can you enable participant sharing? So what I'll do is I'll start sharing the screen from my side only, because this might take a very long time.
Yeah, ma'am, it seems to be stuck when I go full screen, so.
Yeah. We can just enable participant sharing. It's still disabled. Oh, you you need to unmute yourself. You're muted.
Ma'am, I've made you the host. Ma'am, you've
all right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Pull it up yourself now.
Okay. All right. Well, so is it visible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am, we can see it.
Yes, ma'am, it's good looking.
Well, so these are the 4. Let me give you a brief background about the G20 group of nations. I'm sure you all know that it is a group of 20 nations which are of a very different nature. These are countries like US, UK, Japan, which are at very high levels of development, capitalist economies, part of the developed world. Then we are a number of Asian economies which are also part of the G20 nations. We are also not just at different levels of educational development and growth, but also at different levels of technological integration. If we talk about countries like Japan and South Korea, they are way ahead as compared to countries like India and Sri Lanka. So there is a lot of disparity in terms of the current status of economy, the demography, the culture, the technological enablement. So all of this makes G20 group of nations a very, very diverse group of nations. And it was only in as late as in 2018 that education was for the first time included as a priority in the G20 agenda. Now, what does the G20 Education Working Group does? This group provides us an opportunity to reflect upon certain priority issues and also to formulate strategies for addressing these issues. So what do we do in the education working groups? We are a part of the education working group. We are holding a lot number of consultative meetings across the country. And we at NEPA were fortunate to hold one such meeting very recently, and where I was leading the very track on capacity building, lifelong learning, and the future of work. So what do we do over here? We not just share the strategies at the national level, but we also talk about what initiatives and best practices work in a particular nation, particularly how to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all, which, as you all must be knowing, is one of the important agendas and goals of SDG 2030 as well. Now, if you look, as I said, it was only in 2018 that education became part of the G20 discussions. Now, if you look at the priorities that were fixed from that very year, the Argentina presidency, education and skills policy, financing and international cooperation were the focus areas. In 2020 in Saudi Arabia, it was equitable access to quality, early childhood care, and internationalization in education. If you look at the 2021 agenda, it moved to blended teaching and learning, educational poverty, global cooperation and commitments. And in the year 2022, when Indonesia was the host nation, the focus was on universal quality education, digital technologies, solidarity and partnership, and the future of work post COVID-19. Now, if you look across these four priority areas in the past few years, one thing that is emerging commonly is something related to the skills and capacity building of the youth so that they can become work ready. The second is in terms of international collaborations, cooperations, etc. And the third is how technology is going to impact teaching and learning in the coming years. So these three were some common elements, a common thread that was running across all the G20 presidencies in the previous year. Now, what is it that the G20 Indian presidency is talking about? So we have 4 education working groups in India. The first one is on ensuring foundation literacy and numeracy, again now in the context of blended learning. The second is on making tech-enabled learning more inclusive, qualitative, and collaborative at every level. Now you will see that we have moved beyond this, where we were just talking about how digital elements can be brought into education. Now we are talking about how we can make it more inclusive and also about the quality control parameters when technology is being used in education. So we are moving forward from there. The third track, which is on building capacities, promoting lifelong learning in the context of future of work, again draws from the kind of demands that are being put up on the education sector in the current decade and century. Moving on to the fourth, which again is also part of the third track, is strengthening research and promoting innovation through richer collaboration. Now, these are the 4 tracks on the education working group in the G20 Indian presidency. But today I shall be focusing on the track 3, which talks about building capacities for future of work. Now, if you look at the kind of relationship that existed between education and work, the link between the two is nothing new. There have been studies which have proven that with higher levels of education, one can get better quality jobs in terms of regularity, in terms of the job conditions, in terms of work-life balance, and also there are evidences of higher salaries at higher levels of learning. However, this link between education and work has become very intense and very complex because of the emerging labor market needs in the current times. We are all aware of the fact that today is a technology intensive, knowledge driven economy, and the pace at which the production methodologies are getting changed. In fact, if we use the word, the production techniques are getting disrupted in this era of industry 4.0 and industry 5.0 revolution. It will not be very easy to actually skill the manpower at the same pace at which the employment requirements are changing. And that is the very reason as to why you can find a shift in the global emphasis from elementary to higher and vocational levels of education, and also from access and completion to learning achievements, particularly after the post 2015. So it was in the Commonwealth Education Ministers Conference, the 18th Commonwealth Education Ministers Conference, which was held in Mauritius in the year 2012, that for the first time it was recommended that skills should be integrated even at the higher education level. Otherwise, before then, skills training was never thought to be a component of higher education sector. But 2015 changed the entire attitude towards higher education. However, it was much earlier. It was in 2001 that the United Nations has already actually identified this issue and had made employability as one of its 4 priorities for national policy action on youth employment. Now, employability and employment, these are two words which are often used interchangeably. However, the two mean little different. Employment, of course, all of us know, if one has some kind of a productive means of contributing towards the economy, one can be called to be employed. But employability doesn't ensure or doesn't guarantee that one should be employed. Employability simply means that one should be ready for employment. How one can be made ready to find a suitable employment, the best possible employment for which he has been skilled. So it should not, a person should not be underemployed or overemployed, but his employment should be matching with his level of education and the type of education that he has sought. So employability is all about 3 domains: knowledge, of course, which comes from your basic education, your disciplinary background, but it also includes the attitude, aptitude, and then the skills to actually put your knowledge into practice. So employability is an amalgamation of 3 domains: knowledge, attitude, and skills, which leads to good quality employment. Now, with this in the background, let us very quickly take a look at what is the status of youth in the G20 nations as a whole. Now, these are a couple of important G20 countries which have been shown in this very graph. And as you can see that the youth unemployment rate in these countries ranges from as low as 3.7% in Japan to as high as 56% in South Africa. Now you can see the range of disparity that exists, and therefore the kind of concerns, of course, would be different across the nations. But then how as a group we can move forward is something that we'll be talking about a little later. Similarly, if you look at the percentage of skilled workforce, again you will find that there is wide-ranging disparities between the G20 countries. As you can see, India, we are the least with not even 2%. This I have just put rounded figures. Otherwise, we are not even 2% of our workforce is skilled formally. While in South Korea, this percentage is almost just the opposite. So 96% of the workforce in South Korea is skilled workforce. Now, this again puts a lot of stress on the group as a whole. This figure shows the skill composition of jobs in various G20 nations. And as you can see here, the red segment in the bars, which refers to those kind of skills which are basic in nature, you will find that most of the developing worlds have got a major share of the basic skill composition in jobs, while the developed economies like the UK, the US, Japan, South Korea, they have advanced, which is in purple, or at least intermediate skilled jobs to be majority in these countries. Now, this again makes it very difficult to move together as a group, and therefore, what kind of strategies need to be built so as to see that the entire progress of the group as a whole is more inclusive becomes all the more challenging. Let us quickly see what is the kind of percentage change in the share of total employment that is envisaged. Now, if you look over here, very clearly you will see that most of the times these blue bars are low skill jobs, the gray ones are medium skilled, and the darker blue are the high skill jobs. Now again, what you can observe is there is large scale of disparity amongst the developed and the developing part of the world in terms of low skilled and high skilled jobs. Again, you can see the share in the change, the share of the developed nations in the high skilled jobs is going to be higher as compared to the developing nations. Now, for the G20 as a whole, if you can see over here, for the G20 as a whole, what would be the employment change by skill level? For G20 as a whole, you can see between 2017 to 2025, the proportion of high skill jobs is more as compared to low skill jobs. So in 1991 to 2016, it was just the opposite. However, the proportion of the high skill jobs in future is likely to rise. And it is this which is again going to make a lot of difference for the kind of education that we want to promote in all the countries. Now, this figure again shows what kind of employment change is envisaged. Now, you can very clearly see over here that in future, it is not the jobs where working with hands or labor intensive sectors which are going to be growing at a lower rate, like the manufacturing, the mining and quarrying, the agriculture, forestry, hunting and fishing. All of these sectors, as you can see, are showing a negative growth, while the sectors that are showing a positive growth in future comprise of business and administrative services, they comprise of transport, storage and communication, they comprise of financial services, they comprise of construction, accommodation, restaurant, etc. So basically all these services are those services which are likely to be impacted more by the technological revolution as compared to the labor intensive sectors which are likely to experience a slowdown in the coming years. The next very important concern, which the entire group of nations as a whole and also individual countries have found, and this is something which is kind of common across all the nations, whether developed or developing, is the mismatch between the qualifications and the field of study of the students and the areas or the sectors where they are working. Now, for the G20 group, on an average, 43% of the workers are either overqualified or they are underqualified. Now, this is a huge percentage, if you can see here. Also, what one finds is 34% of the students are working in those sectors which are not related to their fundamental field of study. So is this a waste? Is this a national waste? If you are not working in the very field of study wherein you have invested the money to gain skills and knowledge. Now this, as you can see, is the case in almost all the nations. So all the nations are facing this issue of mismatch between jobs and the field of studies and qualifications in the G20 group. Now, if we look at the next very important component of the skilled workforce, that is the digital skills, one can very clearly see that even in the basics of digital skills, which let us say can be put as interacting with computers or mathematics and science knowledge, that is the knowledge in STEM subjects, or simply knowledge in computers and electronics, one can very, very clearly see that most of the nations are having a positive bar which shows there is shortage of digital skills in these areas. And I'm not even reflecting upon high-end digital skills. These are very, very basic digital skills, and you will see that majority of the nations are having shortage in terms of digital skills. Now, with this kind of a background in hand, let us very quickly see where is India placed and why it is very important for India to see as to how it can be a part of the G20 nations to move forward as a group. Now, as we all know, that India's challenges in terms of all these factors that we have discussed so far, whether it be the unemployment rate, whether it be the kind of sectoral job potential, whether it be in terms of the skilling of the youth, whether it be in terms of the overqualification or underqualification of the employed youth, India's challenge are more intense for several reasons. Let us very quickly see what are these. Now, the demographic dividend in India, we all are aware of the very fact that 62% of our population is in the working age group of 15 to 59 years, of which 50% of it is below 25 years. So India, as we talk of, has a demographic dividend, but whether we'll be able to convert this dividend into an advantage or this remains a disadvantage depends upon the kind of strategies that we can build for ourselves. The second very important aspect for the Indian economy is its slow growing and skewed job market. Now here again, the workforce in India is projected to grow by 27% per year, but 60% of the increments of the jobs are going to be in the services sector, a majority of them being again in financial and finance related sectors and in IT and IT related sectors. So these are the two sectors where majority of the jobs are going to grow in future. But then another very important thing that is going to happen is that very soon the labor market demands at the local as well as the global levels are going to converge, because we know that the kind of new digital economy that is emerging with the industry 4.0, 5.0, AI based revolutions which are taking place, there is nothing like a workplace. There is nothing like a fixed workplace for the youth anymore. Anybody can be sitting in any part of the globe and can be working for any other company. So when we are talking about this kind of a new digi economy, the demands from the labor market at the local and global level are going to be converging very soon. The next very challenging figures, very shocking figures in terms of India are its poor learning outcomes and employability for the young graduates. Now, there are reports which have shown that not even 60% of our engineering graduates are able to find employment. 60% of them are remaining unemployed every year. And 68% of our graduates and 53% of our postgraduates from other general academic streams remain unemployed every year. In fact, there are reports to say that even in the diploma holder category from technical fields, 60% of the youth do not find jobs of matching order. So these are very high figures that prove the point. Quality and equity in our education systems is much lacking. The next very important aspect of the Indian education system is that the entire skills system in our country, the skills ecosystem, if I may put like that, is extremely fragmented and discontinuous. There is lack of continuum. And when there is lack of continuum, we do not have a place where once a youth gets skilled, he can de-skill himself, upskill himself, or reskill himself, depending on the changing nature of the job market. Now, this again becomes an area of concern for India as a whole. Some of the figures over here will prove my point even further. Now, India has actually put up a mark for itself, a target for itself to skill about 29 million people by 2030. This is the kind of skill deficit which has been calculated for India by the ILO, the International Labour Organization. And interestingly, in one of the surveys, it was found that 92% of employees in India believe that there is a skill gap in the country. Can you believe? 92% of them believe so. And very interestingly, 76% of them, they feel that personally they have been impacted by such a skill gap. Now look at the figures. So there is no dearth of the fact that they are aware that this is an issue. Everybody is aware that this is an issue. 92% of them believing there is a skill gap, 76% of them saying that yes, I am also impacted by this kind of a skill gap. So poor graduate employability in India is now a well-established and known fact which has both demand and supply side issues. Now, what are these demand and supply side issues in the higher education graduate labor force in the country? Now, I haven't brought the figures here, but if you would look at the kind of current graduate workforce that we have, they are engaged in certain sectors. So they are mainly concentrated in sectors like financing services, community and personal services, trade, restaurant, and hotels. But the sectors wherein very few educated youth are working are agriculture and allied, construction, mining and quarrying, transport, manufacturing, etc. And then the sectors which have been projected to be high in demand in employment are going to be auto and auto component building, construction, textiles and clothing, transport and logistics. Now, if you look at these sectors, they are very similar to the ones which have been shown in the previous diagram for G20 group as a whole. So now if the sectoral composition of incremental growth in jobs is going to match for this group as a whole, then where is it that the demand side and supply side problem lie in case of India? Now what we find over here is this is the two-way mismatch that we find in terms of Indian youth. The available jobs lack matching skilled and qualified youth. The sectors which are high on growth are not high on demand by educated youth. So you see here, the third line which shows the sectors which are going to be high in incremental demand in employment. These are the sectors where lesser number of our graduates are working today. More of our graduates are working in these sectors. Less of them are working over here. However, it is the latter which are going to be growing faster in the coming years. So what is it that is preventing our graduate youth to be well prepared for the job market? In a survey which we conducted for 6 states in the country, we spoke to very senior level executives in different types of organizations, including the multinational corporations, big domestic companies, also medium and small scale industry sector. So a mix of various kind of companies that we reached out to. We spoke to senior level executives over there. On the other hand, we also went to a number of local colleges and universities in the same cities where we reached out to the employers. And when we spoke to the students, teachers, and also the vice chancellors, the principals, so the leadership in the higher education institutions, what we found was that there were 3 kinds of gap. One was the awareness gap in terms of what future holds for us. So what are the kind of changes that are going to take place is something which the student community and the teaching community is not very well aware of. So there is a lot of need to do some kind of a work in terms of having a robust labor management information system in place, which is lacking not just in India, but many of the other countries in the G20 nations. So is it possible to build some kind of a labor management information system which is common for the country groups as a whole? Because as I said, that the global and local job needs are going to converge very soon. So it is very important to fill in this gap, some kind of a labor management information system to be built in. Perception gap. What is this perception gap? So the skills, supposing there are 10 skills which have already been identified both by the employers as well as the prospective employees, that is our students and the teaching community. But then the perception between these groups again differs a lot. So the kind of priority that one group might add to these set of 10 skills might not match with what the employers add. Let me give you a small example. For example, the employers were of the opinion that foreign language skill is not so very much important for young graduates when they are trying to just look for their first jobs. While on the other hand, the students and the teachers had placed foreign language as an important requirement for the job market. Now, this kind of a perception gap exists between the employers and the learners. The third, of course, is the acquired skill gaps, about which I don't think I need to explain much. But what we need to know is, amongst the skill gaps that exist, there are 3 categories of skills that they are talking about. One is the knowledge and technical skills, which is related to the subject area in which you have had a degree or for which you have been seeking a qualified degree. Now the employers are reasonably satisfied with these kind of skills. The second set of skills are the functional skills, which are relatively more industry specific. So whether you are able to put the knowledge that you have earned in a particular subject domain into practice is what is meant by functional skills. But here, of course, the graduates are found to be lacking to some extent, but the industry people are of the opinion that these are industry specific, and then they normally take care of these kind of skills once the young graduates have joined their companies and they have undergone some kind of a training and orientation program. But what they are more concerned about is the personal and soft skills. Now, these personal and soft skills are something which the industry people say cannot be built in one day or at an age when the Indian youth enters the labor market. So where then these skills have to be built? These skills need to be built right from very low levels of learning, right from lower levels of schooling, or maybe even from the households itself. And therefore comes the importance of that component, that is lifelong learning. Now, how can we provide an environment for lifelong learning, beginning from the foundational stages to higher education, so that a skills continuum is managed and established, becomes the second challenge for this group as a whole. Now, looking at the kind of distortions or the disparities that exist, first, of course, the pace at which the demand for the skills is changing cannot be matched by the changes that one can make in the education system. That is the biggest challenge that we face. But other than that, there are disciplinary distortions. So the students, a majority of our students are enrolled in general academic streams in BA, BCom, BSc programs, while the demand from the employer side is for those graduates which are coming from the market oriented courses or technical and professional backgrounds. It begins here itself. Quality distortions, again, I don't need to explain much. A majority of our institutions, more than 80% of our institutions are not even NAC accredited. So quality is again a problem. Degree diploma distortion. There still exists a lot of stigma in our country in terms of diploma versus the degree programs. Equity distortions, of course, a large proportion of our children in the schools and colleges, they come from different kinds of socio-cultural and economic backgrounds, and along with them, they bring a lot of baggage to the campuses, which needs to be taken care of. However, the systems that are existing are found to be deficient in taking care of doing away with these baggages. Now, similarly, if you look at the skills and training panorama that is existing in the country, we have the educational institutions and the training centers which work under the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship under the overall umbrella of NSDC, the National Skills Development Corporation. So what kind of, we have formal education institutions both at the school and higher education level. Then we have informal training institutions. And as a third set of organizations, we have vocational educational institutions like the ITIs and the polytechnics. Now, these three strands of education and training organizations work in complete silos. There is no coordination amongst these three. They work in complete silos. It is only uh, in recent times that the new education policy is now talking about creating a skills integration across all levels of education, to the extent that it even talks about introducing vocationalization of higher education by way of opening bachelor's in vocational, that is BVoc, MVoc programs, even taking it as high as to the doctoral levels. So we have a PhD in vocational education. So that is something which is new, but it is just very new at a nascent stage. We are just talking about it. There are about 12 to 13 skill universities that have been opened in the country, but nobody knows what these skill universities are doing actually. The new education policy is also talking about building some flexible pathways between vocational education and academic streams of education so that there is free movement from one to the other and vice versa. But all of these are just some recommendations which have been made in the recent education policy. But as of now, we find that all these sub-segments of the skills and training panorama in the country are disjointed, they are uncoordinated, they are overlapping, and more importantly, they are uncontinuous. If you look at the existing models of employer-supported training institutions in the country, you will find them to be existing in these categories. So we have some multinational corporations and corporate bodies, big corporate houses like the Airtel, the Mahindra, the Tata, which have been having their own training schools and colleges. There are some semi-government autonomous bodies. This include a large number of public sector organizations like the BHEL or the ONGC, or for example, SEBI, the Securities Exchange Board of India. All of them, the national cooperatives, all of them, they have their own education wing and institutions which are training youth for the kind of work that they are involved with. We have corporate universities. These are the universities which have been opened and they are owned by the corporate bodies. These are private universities. NIIT being the very first of them, which started with some short-term market-oriented programs, but has then got converted into a full-fledged university of a big order. Then we have the NSDC partners, both in terms of formal education institutions and some small scale training institutes. So this is the kind of employer supported training model that we have in the country. Unfortunately, except for the first two categories where the ownership and the role of the employer is of a high order, the other three categories find themselves to be deficient in the way the employer community is engaging itself. So if you look at what the NEP 2020 has talked about, what is its vision, mission, what is its perspective plan, how some kind of a priority setting needs to be done. There are no guidelines with respect to that. But of course, there is a vision and there is a perspective plan. There is an implementation plan, not a perspective plan, but an implementation plan in order to bring about changes under some such heads. What are these? Restructuring of the entire education system, curricular reforms, extracurricular activities, infrastructure and support services, and last but not the least, multi-stakeholder engagement. Now, since today our focus is on what kind of global awareness or global engagement we can think about when we are talking about India's G20 presidency, I will today only talk about multi-stakeholder engagement in these entire components of the recommendations which have been made in the new education policy. So let us see how at the global level, which are the areas in which the G20 nations can think about collaborating and coming together to be able to tackle the issue of capacity building and lifelong learning at the global level. The very first area where they can think of acting is maintaining and strengthening collaborations with the industry and other higher education institutions. So it is not just the higher education institutions in one's own country and one's own nation, but also in other higher education institutions. Exploring the opportunities for internships and projects with local industry. How internships and projects can be provided in the local industry to students from other countries is again one major area which G20 nations as a whole can think of. Establish partnership with the ministries, state departments, civil society organizations, non-government organizations, the MSME, the institutes of specialized training like the SEBI, like many of our own public sector organizations, how some kind of a partnership can be established at the international level, that is at the G20 level, with these stakeholders. The fourth area where the G20 nation as a whole can think about is how to involve potential employers and skills training centers. How can the potential employers be put together to think about what kind of skills training centers can be opened which can subserve the common requirement of G20 nations as a whole, but also giving due diligence and importance to the inter-country differences. The next area which they can think about, and which is a very, very important area, because nothing moves and nothing happens until and unless matching funds are available. So exploring means and sources for financial assistance and scholarships to socio-economically disadvantaged students who are pursuing vocational programs or who are pursuing job-related programs, market-oriented programs, which are the programs where you will find students coming from the socio-economically disadvantaged groups to be in lesser number. So what kind of scholarships and fellowships, etc., can be instituted for this group of institutions, is this group of students. The next very, very important area is provision and facilitation of teacher training and skill upgradation. Now, human resource base is yet another area where the G20 nations as a whole need to put all their forces and all their minds to. Now, these are the areas which have been highlighted by the G20 education working groups in some of the seminars which have been held so far. We happen to be part of one such seminar which was held in Chennai, where the G20 India Presidency has highlighted these. So what are these? Strategies and programmatic interventions to be adopted to strengthen capacities for promoting lifelong learning, measures for skilling, reskilling, upskilling, and multi-skilling of learners, creation of a workforce that is future ready, then a robust digital learning ecosystem and facilitate acquisition of digital skills and literacy. The next is in terms of how to strengthen human and institutional capacity. So as I said, teacher training, and also infrastructure. So strengthen human and institutional capacity for promoting lifelong learning, skilling, reskilling, upskilling, and multi-skilling. Flexible pathways to lifelong learning. Now, this flexible pathways is something which time and again is coming to fore when we are talking about lifelong learning to become an important element in the light of future of work. Identifying innovations and technological advances that serve as an enabler for accessing better lifelong education and opportunities of work. So as I said, research and innovation is going to be a part of this component as well. Roadmap to enable human-centered, intergenerational, and anticipatory policy response to the future of work. Now, human-centered and intergenerational. These two are very important words that have been put by the G20 nations here. Why human-centered? Because it has been kind of realized and also accepted that the base level of disparities amongst the learners is very much different across the nations, and therefore all the initiatives that need to be taken have to be human centric and not anywhere else. So this is the kind of roadmap which has been fixed up in the context of changing environment at the global level. What are those factors that need to be kept in mind have been put here on the left side of the chart. Climate change. So sustainability is a big issue. Sustainable environment, sustainable climate. So climate change is happening. Armed conflict. We all know how the democracies across the world are getting compromised. So how Ukraine has been facing. So everywhere, every part of the world, there is some or the other armed conflict which is hitting the mankind. COVID-19 impact, of course, which is going to continue for a long time. We have already seen persistent inequalities. We have seen in the earlier slides how inequalities of income and growth and education continue to exist amongst the countries. Digital revolution, of course, this is something which nobody can stop. This has come and this is going to happen and become more intense. Funding and accounting complexities. This is going to become even more challenging in the coming days. So with this kind of a global change in picture, this is the circle of tasks that the G20 as a whole are trying to do in the education working groups. What are these? Not just identifying the lifelong learning for the capacity building, but what are the gaps for future of work? So we need to identify these gaps. So maybe some kind of a skill mapping to be done for the G20 as a whole. How multi-stakeholder and international collaborations can be built, keeping in mind the local advantages and local priority is the second aspect. The third is the target setting for G20 as a whole. Do we need a common policy framework? Will a common policy framework work for all the G20 nations, or there has to be some kind of a benchmarking to be done for different countries within a common policy framework? The third aspect is a mutual recognition of qualification and skills, transfer of credits across nations. So how, in order to be able to more mobile, to provide more mobility to the students and learners across the G20 nations, it is very important that we mutually recognize each other's qualifications, degrees, skills, training, etc. The next component that the group as a whole is talking about is how to set up quality infrastructure and other support systems, both in terms of physical and human requirements in the education and training institutions. And last but not the least, how can this be made equitable, sustainable, and a well-funded skills ecosystem in the G20 nations? So it is for these 4-5 elements that the discussions are on in order to produce 3 documents. These include the G20 Ministerial Declaration, a report which will arise out of a large number of consultations which are happening already, and a compendium of best practices. So these are the kind of 3 documents which the G20 education working groups have been assigned the task to prepare, and we are lucky enough to be part of some of these dialogues and discussions. And that is why I thought it would be good to share some of our own learnings with you all today through this platform. So on that note, thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I'm here to answer any questions, queries, anything that you would like to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation as usual.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very indeed, we learned a lot and very new, all of us, actually. All the participants are very new to this subject, G20. So we learned a lot in, madam. Thank you so much. So we can take 1 or 2 questions, madam. We can take 1 or 2 questions. Before that, madam, can I ask one thing, madam, that we are focusing on skills, training, and employability. So what will be the future of our general studies, especially the social sciences?
That's quite an interesting question, and in fact this is a question of great concern for all of us, because when we talk about this very aspect in different forums, the answer that one gets is that we are not talking about doing away with general academic streams. But what is important for one to realize is that no streams can remain secluded from teaching the young learners to live a good and satisfied life. So it is, when we are talking about skills and employability, it is not just about giving them skills to work with hands. It is also about giving them skills to work with mind. It is also about giving them skills to work with heart. It is also about giving them skills to work with their brains. So that is how we need to define. And in fact, in our own document, the NEPA document that we have prepared, that has gone to the ministry for this track, we have put this fact in words, saying that it is important for the G20 nations as a whole to define what skills are. So simply saying that skills are just technical skills which will enable the students to enter the world of work, it is not that. Skills for a better livelihood to skills for a better life. That is where we are moving. There's some commotion going on at the back.
5 to 5, 5 to 6, 5 to 7.
Is there some?
Yes,
somebody wants to say something, or
who has not muted themselves, and I think it's just the background noise that they're making. They must be unaware that they're being unmuted now.
Ah, I see. Some classroom or some place, it seems.
554. 558. 562. 563. 564.
Yeah.
Yes. Effie,
Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
I go get the host, please.
I'm sorry.
Get the host back, please. Then so that you can control the mute and unmute.
Actually, ma'am has to sign us over as the host. Ma'am, you're currently the host, so if you can make the principal host again.
Okay, one second. Hmm. Changed it?
Yeah, ma'am.
They have muted now. Yeah.
Anyway, it's okay, ma'am.
Are there any more questions, or otherwise then?
Yes, ma'am. We are waiting for any questions. Please, dear participants, if you have any question or only one or two, we can take.
No, sir. Actually, it was so interesting. It's amazing lecture.
Okay, please go to the questions, please, Mansoor Ahmed.
So my question is that how the country like Sri Lanka and basically India can develop the bilateral relation, particularly in the field of education and in the economy.
Sri Lanka
This.
is G20, no? So, anyway, ma'am, please.
Yeah, see, although today we were talking about more in terms of multilateral cooperation, but because we are talking about G20 as a whole, and see, a lot of bilateral relations, as you know, depend on the political uh, leadership and the kind of political relations that the two nations have. Every nation will have some strength and every nation will have some weaknesses, and bilaterally one can learn from each other, but the only issue arises is the political acceptance to the very fact. Now the same applies for India and Sri Lanka also. Until and unless the leadership takes a lead in establishing cordial relations, it becomes difficult to enter into bilateral MOUs. And it will
Thank you so much,
require
ma'am.
one another session to discuss the areas where Sri Lanka and India can maybe think of entering into some such
No, no,
relation.
it's okay, ma'am. Thank you so much for your
But
answer.
textiles can be one area where even the common culture behind culture is also one binding factor for India and Sri Lanka. So some such areas, tourism, some such areas can certainly be thought of. Yes, please.
Ma'am, only one question. It will be the last one that in the chat box. What would be the future of skill training in school levels?
School levels. So we have already in India, what we have started with is at the primary level of schooling, we have already talked about three kinds of skills to be the focus. One is financial literacy, the other is numeracy, and English language. These are the three components of skilling which needs to be focused at the primary level of schooling. And then at higher levels of schooling, like especially from the secondary level of schooling, some vocational elements can be integrated. In fact, it has been made mandatory now at the school level itself that the children should be exposed to art, culture, and some such skill activities like carpentry or masonry or electricians, some such works which uh, can be done with the hands. And not just the children should be exposed to these kinds of activities, but they can also actually learn some such skills at the school level itself. This has been made mandatory. How far it is going to be effective and how we are going to roll it out is yet to be seen.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, madam. It's wonderful to have with us, and we'll expect in future also, madam. Thank you so much. So now I'll request Dr. F. Lal Tankini to give the vote of thanks. Effie.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, we just had a very wonderful session with Professor Mona Kare. Thank you so much, ma'am. We thank you for graciously agreeing to be the resource person today. Like the principal has said, I think many of us are new to this topic and you've deeply, greatly enlightened us. So thank you very much. And secondly, thank you to the principal and the Department of Economics, Government Zolnam College, for initiating this webinar, organizing this webinar. I think all of the participants here today will have walked away with some new knowledge about the G20 summit. And lastly, thank you to the students and participants from different parts of the country. Thank you for taking time out in your afternoon to join us here today. We hope that in the future, we'll be able to come together, not just in the online mode, in personal as well, in a physical form as well, to discuss some wonderful ideas and thoughts together. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are planning to hold a program in the next year for Northeast. So let's see if some of you can participate there. We'll be holding somewhere, maybe, I don't know, we have not yet decided, maybe in Shillong or some such place.
Okay, we'll look forward to it, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And all the very best to everyone. Thank you, Professor Sena. And I'll take.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.